Before we start, just a couple of informations. We invite you to use the bot more often because there are not many ratings of the lectures so far. And you can find bots in every of the rooms and rate the all of the talks. Plus, you can ask questions. So how many of you have actually tried the bot so far? And experience? Okay. You rated your own lecture? No, okay. Yeah, okay. So next talk, Sebastiano need to prepare some last-minute changes, and he'll be here. So you have heard about Spotify, right? Who have installed the Spotify on your mobile? I assume 3? Literally 3? Okay. He will be talking about software engineering and then, of course, transferring to management. I will keep you company until he arrives, and I have no idea what to talk to you about, so help me. Who enjoys the conference? Come on. Yeah, that's not good. Who enjoys the conference? Yeah, that's better. Okay. Okay, then I don't have anything else to say. So, okay. I will start the talk that Sebastian should say. I'm not from Spotify, and I don't know what he would say, but I can tell you that the app is pretty awesome. Yeah? Yes? Our colleagues from supporting the video streaming and the sound said animate us. So I'll do it like this. Sebastiano is coming. Thank you so much.
Sorry, that's late. Hi, everyone. I'm Sebastiano Armeli, and I'm one of the engineering managers working at Spotify in New York City. So yeah, I specifically work on the free monetization department, which means ads. So wherever you listen to ads on Spotify is basically my team building the ads there, especially on the desktop and web client. Actually, at the moment, we are focusing on a new web app, which is going to allow small, medium advertisers to basically build audio ads that are going to be delivered on the Spotify platform. So this talk is about mostly engineering management. So starting from my story, switching from software engineering to management, and then going through activities that an engineering manager does. Those are good and bad principles that an engineering manager usually do. So let's start with my personal story. So up to 3 years ago, that's the kind of output I used to produce, so code. That's JS code, even though I should have used const instead of var in this slide. And I used to work in an environment very collaborative. So working in an agile environment, as you know, at Spotify, doing sprint planning, stand-ups, working, if possible, in doing pair programming, TDD, BDD, and definitely trying to help finding the best solution for problems. So a type of role we call a developer, engineer, programmer. In management, we use the term individual contributor. So it's basically someone that individually contributes to a code base, to a repository, or to multiple repositories. And the type of relationship that you usually have, two types of relationship. One is with your peers, other ICs, individual contributors, and with your manager, with your boss, mostly. And then aside from that, you have, of course, relationship with product owners and business people. And then what happened yeah, almost 3 years ago, there was an opportunity to try out the management path. And mostly because I was interested in team dynamics, in the why we're doing certain things, in the how. So yeah, I decided to accept the challenge and to try out this new path. So of course, dynamics in the team change because first you are a peer in the team, and then you become basically the boss. So the one decides salary, the one that decides performance about people. So definitely there is some challenges there, and there is some adjustment to make. And the type of relationship that also is added is downwards kind of relationship or management, whereas differently from before, where I had to manage, only peers and upwards with your manager, now you have like reports, people that report to you. And definitely something new and something like can be scary at the beginning, especially if it's an internal movement where you have people you used to work with as peers, and then they become your reports. But one thing I'd like to highlight is that this one wasn't, or in general, I don't think it's a promotion when you become a manager from an engineering position. It's a change of career in a way. Anyway, it's a different job. Because I hear sometimes people saying, oh, I was a senior engineer, and I didn't know how to move forward in my career, so I became a manager. But a manager does different things from an engineer. As I'm describing later, in different activities and different skills that the manager needs is like different from an engineer. You can grow as an engineer, learn new things, become an architect, being impactful at different levels, and you can grow as an engineer in that way. You don't have to necessarily become a manager. To become a manager, you need to have a passion for certain things that I'm describing later. If you have the passion for those things, yes, you can switch to a new job. Otherwise, growing doesn't mean becoming a manager. That's something that I wanted to highlight here, because I hear often like, that's mostly in like small startups, that people they just switch to management for this reason. Anyway, practically, what does it change when you become a manager from an engineering position? First of all, meetings overflow. So definitely, you have an increase of meetings in your calendar. People put meetings all the time in your calendars. They want your time. You're pulled in different directions. You do meetings around different things. One-on-ones with your people. You do meetings with product owner. You do meetings with agile coaches, if you have it. You do meetings about planning, the technical architecture. You do meetings about sprint planning, backlog grooming, meetings with managers in other departments. So it's all sorts of directions. People, they want your attention for something. There is a conflict. You need to step in. There are different things. So definitely meetings are probably the way that managers impact the organization. So meetings for a manager, they are not a bad thing. It's actually like the best thing, because that's the way you move things, through words, through meeting with people. And also meetings, they operate for gathering data. Like I use my one-on-ones to gather lots of data from all my reports, from everyone I meet. And then based on this data, I process and I think about things. But like if you don't have that kind of data gathering point, it's really difficult to know what's happening in the organization. Second thing is async conversations. I guess this comes from like my JS background, so like thinking about similar to the event loop in Node, where you take something and like you process and asynchronously you give the output back to the caller. But basically, everyone, as I said, wants your attention for multiple things, but often you don't have the answer. Or you need to ask someone else, or you need to gather more information about that thing. So often you need to keep all those threads open, and you need to make sure you give the right answer, and you give an answer to all those people. So I guess there are different strategies to, keep in mind all the different threads. People use, you have different tools, Trellos, or you can create your nodes. I personally just use my Evernote. Every week I have my Evernote where I put things that I'm interested in. And then on a daily basis, I go through those things, I add things, I edit. So I keep track of all those threads. Uncertainty definitely increases. So when you're an engineer, you run tests, or you basically run in unit tests or different type of testing. You know if your application mostly works or your code works. When you're a manager, you make some actions, you make some decisions that you never know if they are right or wrong at the beginning when you make them, sometimes. Or also, you're more detached from code. So you have to gather information, as I said, from people, and sometimes you don't even look at the code that people are describing in what they tell you. So, and that comes with experience. Even if you don't look at the code, you have to be able to understand and know what you're talking about. That's also another reason why often managers, they were previous developers, because they also they need to have that maturity in understanding what people are talking about, even though they don't know details. And as I mentioned, the feedback loop is definitely not immediate. So for example, you make a hire, you hire someone, you don't know the day after if that hire was a good hire. You think it's a good hire from your 1-2 hours conversation, but the result of your actions are probably, you'll see it in maybe 2-3 months, or you move someone in a different team, you really don't know the day after if that was a right move. So definitely the feedback loop around your actions is not immediate and is much longer. And in general, it's all about people. It's all about your team. You need to build those people skills. You need to be passionate about people to do this job. You need to be honestly interested in what your people are interested in. And there's one classic book called High Output Management says that the output of a manager is basically the output of your team, of your individual contributors, plus other activities you do, but mostly is the output of the team. So if you don't spend enough time with your team, make sure that they are engaged and happy, you can't be a good manager. But let's look at more tactical and practical activities that a manager has to do on a weekly basis. So first of all, hiring. As I said before, it's all about people, so having the right people. So you, as a manager, probably you're in charge of hiring people on your team, unless you inherit people from a different team. But typically, you need to hire and build your team. And you need to look for characteristics and values that those people bring in and they fit in the current structure. So definitely, when I look at people and I look at hiring people, I think at the current state of art in my team, and I make sure that this new hire will fit the personalities, will fit the way of working in the current team. So it has to be the right fit for the current state of my team. So hiring is definitely super important, because if you have the right people, it's mostly likely you will have a good team and a good product. When you hire, also another important thing is looking for diversity. There is a big push in tech at the moment to look for diverse candidates, which, in my opinion, doesn't. It's not only about the physical characteristics. It goes also like about the way that you think and you operate. So definitely bring in people with diverse behavior, diverse way of thinking, brings diversity and innovation in the team. And of course, diversity in terms of like physical characteristics is also important, because probably behind that there is also diversity in terms of behavioral and thinking. Some occasions you have to let people go. That's another activity that you do sometimes, hopefully not. But one thing here to keep in mind is that this is not a nice thing that you do as a manager when you let people go, and you do it mostly because you care about the team. So typically you let people go because that person doesn't fit in the team and other people are not happy with that person. So definitely those conversations, they should go on that line. They shouldn't be involved in any personal reasons with the report, but it's mostly about the team functioning. Because as I said before, the output of the team, the output of a manager is the output of the team. So if the output of the team is not great because one person is not functioning well, that's probably the person needs to be removed from the team. And of course, you can move that person in different teams. And eventually, if that person doesn't work well in other teams, then you have to let that person go, which is not a great outcome, because it's a failure for like every side, because probably you didn't hire the right person. But it's definitely something that, as a manager, it might happen that you have to do. As I said before, one-on-ones. One-on-ones are meetings that happens typically on a weekly basis for half an hour, or bi-weekly, an hour, but it's very flexible, depends on the people. And there are private meetings between two people, manager and report typically, or between peers. One-on-ones with your reports, typically the things that you talk about are first of all, personally, I like to open up how you feel, like the person is going in the team, but then you dig through like the priorities that the person is doing in that specific sprint or that specific week. You talk about career development, not all the time, but often it's good to reconnect whatever the person is working with the career development that you probably set every 6 months. And that's definitely something that it's a big area that the managers should spend time thinking about how someone can progress in their career and how whatever is doing is related to that progress. And then feedback. I personally believe in continuous feedback, in the fact that like managers need to give continuous feedback, maybe every one-on-ones to people, if they're doing well, whatever they can improve. Constructive feedback is super valuable, because definitely like you can make people improve and like guide them towards getting to the next level. Also like getting feedback from them about me, and also asking feedback about other people. I think it's great to have a network of feedbacks where you ask everyone a feedback about other people. So you basically know whatever other people think about a certain person. And again, that's part of like gathering data that is required in meetings. Another activity that I think is super important is caring about employee engagement, which is gathered from one-on-ones, but not only. You can use like tools like Tiny Polls, Office Vibes, to gather data about employee engagement. When we say employee engagement, it's a broad term which includes different areas such as personal development, such as recognition, such as relationship with your peers, relationship with your manager, health, So there are different areas, different metrics in employee engagement, but it's definitely like a super important area that you need to care when you're a manager. And another activity that is critical is performance and compensation review, which are two different things. Performance review is basically, typically happens once a year, or twice a year, or 4 times a year, depends on the company. And it's basically you evaluate the person on how he's doing compared with 3 months ago, 6 months ago. And that's where the continuous feedback loop becomes critical, because you want to set goals and expectation for a certain amount of period, and then every one-on-one check on those expectations in a way that the performance review coming is not something that is unexpected. So I consider when there are performance review and like people, they don't expect something, it's probably a failure from the manager that hasn't been communicating well about how the report was doing. And then compensation review is slightly different from performance review, because compensation review, as you know, depends on multiple things, depends on how the company is doing, on the salary you got in as when you got hired. So it's definitely different from performance review. I think performance review is what is mostly important for individual contributor growth. Now let's look at like some principles, some characteristics that I think a good manager need to have. First of all, time management. As I mentioned before, there are a few activities that you need to do. You're pulling multiple directions. So definitely spending your time in doing the right thing, that's key. And often, like, you don't know what's the right thing to do. You don't know, like, which activity is the most important and most impactful. So definitely, when you grow as a manager, and the best managers are the people that they know that whatever they're doing is the most impactful activities. It's always hard because you have multiple things to do and like, or multiple conversations. So deciding what to focus on, that's definitely a challenge. So good managers are people that they're able to prioritize and manage their time in the best way. Empathy, that's crucial. I mean, putting yourself in somebody's shoes, in engineers' shoes, that's key. And that's also another reason why like being an engineer in the past before being a manager, that's another advantage, because you knew what means developing and finding solutions, researching solutions, finding issues, and having trouble in solving problems. So definitely having empathy in that, but also empathy when there are like conflicts, and making sure that you listen to each part and you come up with a fair outcomes, fair solution. Attracting people. So before I mentioned among the activities, hiring. So definitely you need to also be able to attract people, because when you interview someone, also the person that gets interviewed interviews you. So that person wants to work for you. So you need to be able to have people wanted to work for you. So attracting people, that's key. And being in a very competitive market, that's super important. Decision maker. When you're a manager, you make decisions. As I mentioned before, sometimes you need to let people go. Sometimes you need to hire people. Sometimes you need to decide to move someone in a different team, or some other times, I don't know, there is a planning and there are some tech debt to do, and like people are not sure on whatever feature or epic needs to go first, and comes to you to be like the guy that makes the decision and says, okay, this feature we need to prioritize as soon as possible because maybe, I don't know, it's a security issue, needs to come first. Or you need to decide about, with product owners, about if a technical feature can be done in the sprint or maybe not. So definitely there are decisions to make. But also you need to be able to enable other people to decide things. You don't want to be the only one making tons of decisions. You need to enable your team to make decisions. You need to enable your team, for example, to run the planning, to run the stand-ups by themselves. You don't need to be there like to run the show. You don't need to be there to every time decide if a feature will be built in a sprint or not. So there are different, you need to enable people like tech leads to decide the technical architecture and like let people, enabling them to grow and like become mature engineers. Of course, not all the decision can be passed, like as I said, hiring or let people go, but I think the more decision you're able to delegate, the better you're able to grow other people. And multitasking, again, related to time management, that's another thing that, as I mentioned before, I want to stress it again. It's super important that people are able to handle multiple things, but also be uncomfortable in the situation where some days you finish the day and you feel like you haven't done anything. That's a kind of a feeling that sometimes you have when you're a manager, because you're used to write code and like produce something, and when you're a manager, maybe you're pulling a day multiple conversations, and you feel like, oh, I haven't even written any email, I haven't written anything, I just talked to people, I was in so many conversations. So definitely being used and being like used to that kind of uncomfortable situation that I think is typical when you come from an engineering background. Having those tactical and strategical thinking, those are like very management terms, tactical and strategical. Anyway, what it means is basically tactical thinking is having a thinking that applies to a short-term period. So as I said before, like something like moving someone in a team for 3-6 months, that's a tactical thinking, tactical operations that you do. Strategical thinking is more about long-term decisions. So for example, running a meeting that will decide which kind of framework we're going to base multiple web applications in our company, that's definitely a strategical thinking, because that's going to affect how we build web apps in the future, and how we build web apps in the future affects multiple things, affect the hiring, affects architecture. So it's definitely like a strategical activity. And you need to have a balance between those two things. You need to think practically in a short term, on a sprint basis, whatever happens, and like fix those kind of things, but also like having a long-term vision where you see things happening in the long term. And I guess the more you grow in management, the more you have strategical activities to do and less tactical, and vice versa. And overall, you need to strive to be a leader. Management and leadership are two different things. I don't want to enter in this topic because it will take another talk, but definitely, I mean, leadership, it's being a leader comes with lots of features, and I think a manager should strive to be a leader for their team, like inspiring the team, being an example for the team, being passionate, being active listening in the team. Not always happens, but that's, I think, like a goal for a manager. Whereas, let's look at some bad things that like a manager can do, or bad principles. Very classic is micromanagement. I guess, I don't know if you ever experienced micromanagement before, but I don't know, situation where a manager doesn't trust you. A manager is always asking what you're doing, is not sure about if you're doing the right job, if you're doing enough work, that's definitely signs of micromanagement that probably needs to be avoided, because if you chose people on your team, or at least you have people on your team, and the output of you related to output of your team, you need to trust them. And that's so yeah, micromanagement definitely something that I strongly believe needs to be avoided. Coding more than 50% of your time, that can be a bit controversial, but I think a manager shouldn't code more than 50% of their time. I mean, it really depends on the team and the organization. So that's as a context. But I think there are so many activities the manager can do and it can impact people, that coding is probably, in a mature team, is probably not the best time that a manager can spend their time. Like at the moment, for example, I don't write code because I've got in my team like enough senior engineers that can write code and they can make technical decisions. So like I trust them to do that, and like probably they're even better than me in writing code. So yeah, I believe that a manager can spend time in all the activities I mentioned before, and that's a better way of using their time. Stress, that's definitely something to avoid, or to avoid showing to people. When you're, everything you say as a manager, or everything you do as a manager, or the way that you act, impacts people much more than when you're an individual contributor. So if you're stressed, or if people notice that you have a certain behavior, people notice it much more, and then it can impact people's work much more. So you need to be careful with that. Also avoiding being the single point of failures, which is partially related to micromanagement and not being able to delegate work. So definitely, you should try to enable people as much as you can, and not being the only point of decision and the only person that knows things. So definitely, for example, when you switch from I remember from a senior engineer to a manager, it's key that you spread the knowledge about whatever you know across all the team, because you probably have lots of activities that you have to do, and you don't want to be that single point of failure. And also unhealthy life. I think overall it's a very anti-pattern when you manage people. Being unhealthy definitely increase the stress level. Anyway, so yeah, I guess I hope I went through my story about moving from software engineering to software management. The fact that there are kind of two different paths, the activities that an engineering manager does, and principles and things that you probably need to have when you want to switch into this new career. So hopefully I made clear for people that they want to become a manager, whatever they will have to do if they get the position, and which characteristics they need to have or they don't need to have in those cases. And that's all from me. I'll leave time for some questions.
Yes, we have actually 2 questions. What is the concrete methodology you're using to manage your team?
If you talk about values, definitely I encourage people to be super transparent and to communicate with me all the time and very directly. I'm pretty direct with them. I really think transparency and honesty is a good way to communicate with people. And definitely also, it's key to be the bridge between, because you're a middle manager, so it's key to be the bridge between upper management and engineers. So making sure you translate whatever happens in the company to the people you're reporting to you.
Second one, how do you manage team skill set against projects, technology, and domain stack?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, I mean, that's, I guess that's one of the most fun activities I find. But it's kind of often it's a puzzle, right? You have teams that you manage, or maybe you have just one team. But say you have multiple teams that you manage, or you have different people and different skills, different personalities. So you have to make sure that the team composition is also correct, right? So it's, and that's the fun where you need to be in charge and you lead that. You're responsible for how a team is made of. And for me, that's the most fun part, making sure that this puzzle is right, that the skill set are right. Well, I mean, practically, often what I do, I just write on a note, like the name of the people. If there is a reorg or something, name of people, and I put the skills, and like I try to, and I know whatever is the roadmap in a squad, and like I try to combine those teams. Of course, as I said, like a manager is accountable for that. So also doesn't mean that I'm the only one making the decisions. I maybe draft a proposal, and then it goes to like, I talk to other people, I bounce off ideas, and also I talk to the people to see if that's what they want to do. Because if like someone doesn't want to work in a team, or what I thought was right, maybe it's not because it doesn't go along with that person, and I thought he was going along with that person, then I need to change things on the fly. So, but I think it's a fun process where you build your draft, you get your ideas bounce off with other people, you get involved, you report. I mean, that's the way I like to like organize teams typically. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, you have many more questions. What do you think about holacracy?
About?
Holacracy. Holacracy.
Holacracy? So like you mean a model where there are no managers? I think it's very utopia. It's not very realistic, because I mean, it can work for a short amount of time, but if you have like a large organization or in a long run, people, it's a nature of things, like having all those sort of activities, people, they need someone accountable for all the sort of activities I mentioned before. That's not something that can be done collectively.
What about self-organized teams?
Self-organizing teams, that's, yeah, that's totally great. I mean, that, and that's definitely like something that I believe. And so after that, you make up a team, whatever the way that they decide to organize themselves. If they decide to do stand-ups on Slack, or physical stand-ups, if they decide to do 1 week sprint, 2 week sprint, if they want to do like release on every 2 weeks, continuous delivery, that's up to the team. And like, I think that's the way it should work. I think the other side is that a direction from a manager is also needed, in the sense of like, you have to ask the right questions and bring ideas to the team. So for example, if you notice that problem has already been solved in other part of the organization, I think the manager's role is about asking the right question. Oh, guys, have you considered this and that? Why don't we do this and that, like another team has done? But then if the team really thinks that that's not the fit for the current team or for the situation, then yeah, I mean, that works too. But I think the role of the manager is to ask the right questions and surface those, those questions, those things.
And one more, how do you motivate self-organizing team?
I mean, autonomy, that's a very big word. I think autonomy and trust, there are like two things that they need to, that you need to be emphasizing. in these kind of teams. I think people that they are empowered and they feel ownership on things, they definitely put lots of passion in whatever they do, and I believe that's what drives probably success and like people wanting to achieve. So the sense of being autonomous and definitely ownership. So really caring about something, and if you're an owner, you usually care about something, and I think that's key when you have very self-organizing teams.
Thank you. Any more questions from the audience? Yeah, here.
I have a question. Why do people say it's people management? Because I personally, from my experience, believe that the manager should be managing project and not people.
So the question is, why do people say people manager?
Yeah, why do always talk about people management?
Right. Because I think an engineering manager is basically a spectrum of like different like areas, right? And that's what I talk in this talk. There is a people management side, which is about, hiring, career development, letting people go, one-on-ones, conflict management. Those are like all people things, and that's where like you really need to focus on the people side. So there is that area. Also, there is the technical side of things where you need to enable like architectural discussions, making sure that like the architectural decision is right, and also the product business side of things where you need to make sure you have an understanding of the product and the business side of things. So you have generally like those three buckets for an engineer manager, but I think it's key that the people management, I think, is like something that often that maybe people don't think too much, but that's in my opinion, that's the biggest, engineering managers should spend most of their time on that, on the people, because that's mostly what determines the output, your output as a manager. But to your question, yeah, like, it's mostly called people manager because you have all those activities that require you understanding people, you understanding like personalities of people, you understanding like why someone want to work with someone, what motivates someone, why someone would like to work in this team. So yeah, that's very people focused. There is no technology, there is no business, it's just people.
Thank you.
Always. Thanks.